They came to me with papers in their hands, smiling, calm, polite, like diplomats always are before the knife. They called it a proposal, but it wasn't a proposal. It was an order. An order wrapped in the language of human rights. They said, "Mr. President, the United Nations encourages you to modernize your laws. We believe this will help you qualify for new aid programs." Do you hear that? Modernize your laws. It means erase your values. I looked at their faces and saw the same arrogance our ancestors faced when the colonizers came. Only the uniforms have changed, the mission has not. They said, "This is about tolerance." I said, "No, this is about obedience." They wanted Burkina Faso to sign documents written in New York, not in Ouagadougou. They wanted to tell our people what family means. They wanted to tell our faith what morality should sound like. And I asked them one question: who gave you the right to dictate to a sovereign nation what we must believe? Silence. Just silence. Because deep down, they know their control depends on our silence. I told them, Burkina Faso will not sell its soul for your money. They shifted in their chairs. The smiles disappeared. And then the threats began. They called it conditional aid. That's their favorite term. Conditional. Meaning you get help only if you agree to obey. They said, "We will increase your funding for education, but you must include new gender curriculum." They said, "We will support your healthcare projects, but your hospitals must comply with international equality standards." International equality standards? Tell me, when was equality ever about forcing nations to betray their own faith? They didn't come with bombs. They came with documents, grants, and empty smiles. But make no mistake, blackmail doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it wears a blue flag. When I refused, they laughed. They said, "You will isolate your nation." I said, "Isolation is better than corruption. Let them keep their money. We've survived without it before, and we will survive again." They thought we would bow, like others have. They thought they could buy our morality with dollars. They forgot this is Burkina Faso. We bend for no one. I told them, "You call it progress. We call it poison." Let me tell you what they really wanted. They came with a document, 73 pages. I read every single one. Page 17 said Burkina Faso must decriminalize certain behaviors. Page 29 said we must implement comprehensive sexuality education in primary schools. Page 41 said we must establish gender identity protections in our Constitution. Our Constitution, the document that defines who we are as a nation, and they wanted to rewrite it from New York. I asked them, "Did you consult our religious leaders?" They said, "This is not about religion. This is about human rights." I said, "Human rights according to whom? Your philosophers, your activists, your universities?" They said, "According to international consensus." I said, "There is no consensus. There is only Western pressure disguised as consensus." You see, they use the word international like it means everyone, but it doesn't. It means them, their values, their worldview, their agenda, and they expect the entire world to conform. They said, "Mr. President, you're on the wrong side of history." I said, "History is written by those who survive, and we will survive long after your empires fall." That's when their tone changed. That's when the diplomat became the enforcer. He said, "Without international support, your economy will collapse." I said, "Our economy collapsed under international support. We've been receiving aid for 60 years, and we're still poor. Maybe your support is the problem." He said, "You're being unreasonable." I said, "No, I'm being sovereign, and you're not used to that." When they realized I wouldn't yield, they tried a different tactic. They sent envoys, friendly representatives. One of them said, "Mr. Traoré, surely you don't want to be seen as intolerant." I said, "I am not here to be seen. I am here to protect my people." He said, "The world is changing." I said, "Not every change is progress." He said, "You will lose international reputation." I said, "We already lost our reputation when we allowed others to define it." You see, they think Africa's morality can be rented. They think we can be educated out of our beliefs. But our beliefs were not written in New York. They were written in the dust of this land, watered by the blood of those who refused to kneel. They told me, "If you continue this path, you will be isolated." I told them, "Good. A clean conscience needs no company." And when they left the room, they didn't shake my hand. They left their papers behind, and I left them where they belonged, in the trash. But let me tell you what happened next, because this is where it gets interesting. This is where you see the system for what it really is. This is where the mask comes off and you see the face of neocolonialism in its modern form. 3 days after that meeting, I received a call from the World Bank. They said our loan application for agricultural development had been denied. The application we submitted 6 months earlier. The application that was already approved pending final signatures. The application that would have funded irrigation systems for 10,000 farmers in the northern region. Suddenly denied. The president who said no, a story of defiance. I asked why. They said, technical reasons. Technical reasons. That's code for political reasons. That's code for you didn't obey, so now you pay. 2 weeks later, the International Monetary Fund suspended our credit line. The credit line we'd been using to stabilize our currency. The credit line that helped us manage inflation. The credit line that kept our economy from collapsing during the drought last year. Gone. Just like that. Again, technical reasons. 1 month later, the European Union announced they were reviewing their aid package to Burkina Faso, 400 million euros, money designated for schools, hospitals, roads, clean water projects, money that was already allocated, money that our people were counting on. Under review. They said they had concerns about our commitment to human rights. Human rights. There's that phrase again. The phrase they use to justify every form of control, every form of pressure, every form of punishment when you refuse to comply. You see how it works? You refuse to sign their documents, and suddenly your loans are denied. Your credit is suspended. Your aid is reviewed. All for technical reasons. All coincidentally happening right after you said no. This is how they control Africa. Not with armies anymore. Not with colonization. With debt. With aid. With the threat of economic isolation. With the promise of prosperity if you obey and the guarantee of poverty if you don't. They make you dependent. Then they make demands. And if you refuse, they cut you off. And they call it your fault. They say you're not committed to progress. You're not committed to human rights. You're not committed to international standards. But what they really mean is you're not committed to obeying them. You're not committed to surrendering your sovereignty. You're not committed to letting them dictate how you run your country. Let me tell you how we got here. How one African president decided that enough was enough. How one nation decided to risk everything rather than compromise everything. It started 6 months earlier. A delegation arrived from Brussels. Smiling faces, expensive suits, leather briefcases. They came bearing gifts, or so they said. Mr. President, the lead negotiator said, we're here to discuss the next phase of our partnership. We have a generous aid package ready, 500 million euros over 3 years. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, everything Burkina Faso needs to move forward. I listened. Because that's what they expect. They expect you to listen, to nod, to thank them for their generosity. But, he continued, and there's always a but, there are some conditions we need to discuss, some frameworks we need you to adopt, some policies we need you to implement. He slid a document across the table, 73 pages. I started reading, and with every page my jaw tightened, with every paragraph my blood pressure rose. With every clause I understood what they were really asking. They wanted us to change our laws on marriage. They wanted us to redefine family. They wanted us to introduce comprehensive sexuality education in primary schools. They wanted us to recognize identities that our people don't recognize. They wanted us to criminalize speech that contradicts their ideology. They wanted us to surrender our values for their money. I looked up from the document. The delegation was smiling. They thought this was routine. They thought I would do what every other African leader does. Smile, sign, comply. Gentlemen, I said, I need time to review this with my cabinet. They exchanged glances. Of course, Mr. President. But we need an answer within 30 days. The funding is time sensitive. Time sensitive. Everything is always urgent when they want you to make a decision without thinking, when they want you to act out of desperation rather than conviction. I called an emergency cabinet meeting. My ministers were worried. The finance minister said, Mr. President, without these funds, we'll have to cut budgets. We'll have to delay projects. We'll have to make difficult choices. I said, Then we make difficult choices. But we don't make immoral choices. The education minister said, "The schools need that European money. We were planning to build 50 new classrooms." I said, "Then we'll build 25 classrooms with our own money, and they'll be our classrooms, built with our resources, teaching our values." The health minister said, "The hospitals are counting on those funds for equipment." I said, "Then we'll buy less equipment, but the equipment we buy will come with no conditions, no strings attached, no demands that we change our laws or compromise our principles." The foreign minister spoke up, "Mr. President, if we refuse this, we'll face consequences. Other donors will follow Europe's lead. The international community will isolate us." I said, "Then we'll discover who our real friends are, and we'll learn to stand on our own feet." You see, this is the choice they force on African leaders every single day: prosperity with chains or poverty with freedom, comfort with compromise or struggle with dignity, their money with their control, or our independence with our challenges. And most leaders choose the money. Most leaders choose comfort. Most leaders choose to compromise. Because it's easier. Because it's safer. Because standing up means suffering, and suffering is hard to explain to people who are already struggling. But I refuse to make that choice. I refuse to accept that we must choose between our values and our development. I refuse to believe that the only path to prosperity runs through moral compromise. I spent 3 weeks consulting. I met with religious leaders, Christian pastors, Muslim imams, traditional chiefs, community elders. I wanted to hear from the people who actually represent Burkina Faso's soul, not just the educated elite who parrot Western talking points. The consensus was clear, overwhelming, universal. They said no. They said our children are not experiments. They said our families are sacred. They said our faith is not negotiable. They said money cannot buy what matters most. One elderly imam told me, "Mr. President, we survived colonization. We survived slavery. We survived exploitation. We survived drought and famine and poverty. But we never survived by surrendering who we are. The moment we lose our identity, we lose everything. Better to be poor and proud than rich and ashamed." A village chief said, "Our ancestors fought for this land. They died for this land. They preserved these values through centuries of hardship, and now we're supposed to trade them for European money? What will we tell our grandchildren? That we sold their inheritance for temporary comfort?" A mother of 5 told me, "Mr. President, I don't have much education. I can barely read. But I know this. My children know who they are. They know right from wrong. They know their identity. And I will not let anyone confuse them, no matter how much money they offer." These voices mattered more than any international advisor. These voices represented the real Burkina Faso, not the Burkina Faso that exists in Brussels conference rooms or UN reports, but the Burkina Faso that wakes up every morning, works the land, raises children, builds communities, preserves traditions. On day 29, I called the European delegation. They came expecting my signature. They came expecting compliance. "Gentlemen," I said, "I've reviewed your proposal carefully. I've consulted with my people. I've prayed. I've deliberated. And my answer is no." Silence. They weren't used to hearing that word. African presidents don't say no to Europe. African presidents say yes. African presidents say thank you. African presidents say how high when they're told to jump. "Mr. President," the lead negotiator said slowly, "perhaps you don't understand the implications of refusing this package." I said, "I understand perfectly. You'll withdraw funding. You'll pressure other donors. You'll write negative reports. You'll call me authoritarian. You'll say I'm taking Burkina Faso backward. I understand all of that." He leaned forward. "Then why? Why would you refuse development assistance that your country desperately needs?" I said, "Because my country doesn't need it desperately enough to sell its soul. Because development without dignity is not development. Because prosperity that costs us our identity is not prosperity. Because progress that requires us to abandon our values is not progress. It's regression disguised as advancement." They tried to negotiate. They offered to remove some conditions. They offered more money. They offered technical assistance. They offered partnerships. They offered everything except the one thing that mattered: unconditional respect for our sovereignty. I stood firm. I said no. And I didn't just say it privately. I said it publicly. The next day I stood before the nation, the cameras were rolling, the world was watching, and I spoke the truth they tried to silence. Burkina Faso will not legalize sin for money. We will not trade our moral foundation for foreign applause. Our families are sacred. Our children are not experiments. Our faith is not negotiable. The crowd roared because they were waiting for someone to say it. The people are tired of leaders who smile in front of cameras but kneel behind closed doors. They're tired of politicians who speak about sovereignty in public but sign away our rights in private. They're tired of being told that progress means abandoning everything that makes us who we are. They wanted me to speak softly. I spoke like a soldier. They wanted diplomacy. I gave them honesty. They wanted carefully crafted political language that offends no one. I gave them raw truth that challenges everyone. And the world heard it. Some hated it. But millions loved it because finally, someone said what others only whispered. Finally, someone stood in front of the cameras and said what people say in their homes, in their mosques, in their churches, in their communities, but never hear from their leaders. They called it a viral moment. I call it the truth echoing louder than censorship. I call it the voice of ordinary Africans finally being heard at the presidential level. I call it the beginning of something they can't control. I said, they come to us with papers and policies, telling us how to raise our children, how to structure our families, how to define our identities. But they never ask us what we believe. They never ask us what our people want. They simply tell us what we must accept. I said, they call it modernization. We call it colonization with a new face. They call it progress. We call it the destruction of everything our ancestors fought to preserve. They call it human rights. We call it human wrongs disguised as rights. I said, and we will not participate in our own erasure. We will not applaud our own destruction. We will not fund our own moral collapse with borrowed money and conditional aid. The speech lasted 17 minutes. 17 minutes of unfiltered truth. No diplomatic language. No carefully crafted phrases designed not to offend. No political calculations about international reaction. Just raw, honest conviction spoken by a leader who had decided that truth matters more than approval. And when I finished, the crowd didn't just applaud. They chanted, they sang, they celebrated, they waved flags, they embraced each other, they cried. Because for the first time in decades, they heard a leader speak for them, not for foreign approval. They heard a leader prioritize their values over international aid. They heard a leader choose their dignity over diplomatic convenience. After that speech, the attacks began, not with weapons but with headlines, not with soldiers but with journalists. Not with bombs, but with carefully worded articles designed to destroy my reputation and isolate my country. CNN ran a story. Burkina Faso president's controversial speech raises concerns about human rights. BBC published an opinion piece. Traoré's dangerous rhetoric threatens progress in West Africa. Reuters issued an analysis. African leaders' rejection of international norms could destabilize region. They called me anti-human. They called me dangerous. They called me a threat to democracy. They said Traoré is taking Africa backwards. They said I was promoting hate. They said I was endangering vulnerable populations. They said I was rejecting universal values. Backward? If rejecting moral decay is backward, then let history know I will walk backward proudly. If protecting children from ideological confusion is backward, then backward is the right direction. If preserving the family structure that has sustained humanity for millennia is backward, then I'll walk backward all the way to sanity. They said Burkina Faso will fall without their help, but they were wrong. Our people stood taller than ever before. Farmers, soldiers, teachers, merchants, students all sent messages of support. Letters flooded my office. Emails crashed our servers. Phone calls came from every corner of the country. People stopped me in the streets to shake my hand. Women brought me food they'd cooked themselves. Old men came to tell me stories of the independence struggle and said I reminded them of the leaders who fought the French. Young people said they finally felt proud to be Burkina Faso. Across Africa, others began to speak. From Mali to Niger, from Congo to Uganda, from Tanzania to Namibia, the spark spread. Leaders who had been silent started making similar statements. Religious leaders who had been cautious started speaking boldly. Citizens who had felt alone started organizing. They tried to silence one man and instead awakened a continent. They tried to isolate one country and instead inspired a movement. They tried to make an example of Burkina Faso and instead made us a symbol. And when the clip reached the internet, it exploded. Within 48 hours, 10 million views. Within a week, 50 million. Within a month, over 200 million people had watched that speech. It was translated into 37 languages. It was shared on every platform. It became one of the most watched political speeches in African history. They said progress. I said principles. They said equality. I said identity. They said aid. I said Africa. They said international community. I said national sovereignty. They said human rights. I said human dignity. They said tolerance. I said truth. The line was drawn. Not between nations, but between those who obey and those who still stand. Not between rich and poor, but between the compromised and the convicted. Not between modern and traditional, but between the colonized mind and the liberated soul. Let me read you some of the headlines. Burkina Faso President rejects UN Human Rights Framework. Traoré speech sparks controversy over LGBTQ rights. African leaders' inflammatory remarks draw international condemnation. West African nation risks isolation after president's defiant speech. Inflammatory remarks. I spoke about protecting children and preserving family structures, and they called it inflammatory. I spoke about maintaining moral standards and respecting cultural values, and they called it hateful. I spoke about sovereignty and self-determination, and they called it dangerous. One article said I was promoting hate, because I said our values are not negotiable, because I said our faith matters, because I said our people have the right to reject foreign ideologies, because I said no to their documents. How is that hate? How is protecting your culture hate? How is maintaining your beliefs hate? How is refusing to surrender your sovereignty hate? But that's their tactic. Label any resistance as hate, call any disagreement intolerance, frame any defense of traditional values as aggression, make it impossible to say no without being called a bigot. Another article said I was dangerous to democracy. Democracy. As if democracy means doing whatever the West tells you to do. As if democracy means surrendering your sovereignty to international organizations. As if democracy means letting foreign activists rewrite your constitution. Real democracy means the people choose, and the people of Burkina Faso chose these values. The people of Burkina Faso elected me knowing what I believe. The people of Burkina Faso support these positions. But somehow, when we exercise democracy in a way they don't like, they say we're threatening democracy. They interviewed activists who said my speech would set Africa back decades. Set us back from what? From becoming copies of societies that have abandoned their own moral foundations? From becoming nations that don't know what a woman is? From becoming cultures that celebrate confusion and call it progress? From becoming peoples who apologize for their own existence? If that's moving forward, then yes, we're moving backward. And we're proud of it. We're walking backward into sanity. We're walking backward into clarity. We're walking backward into identity. We're walking backward into the truth our ancestors knew, but we forgot. But here's what they didn't report. Here's what they deliberately ignored. The response from ordinary Africans. The messages of support from millions of people across the continent who were tired of being told their beliefs are primitive, tired of being told their values are outdated, tired of being told they must change to be accepted, tired of being made to feel ashamed of who they are. My office received over 200,000 messages in the first week. Letters, emails, phone calls, social media messages from Nigeria, from Kenya, from Ghana, from South Africa, from Egypt, from Morocco, from every corner of Africa, from the cities and the villages, from the educated and the illiterate, from the young and the old. They said, "Thank you for saying what we've been thinking." They said, "Thank you for standing when others kneel." They said, "Thank you for reminding us that we don't have to apologize for who we are." They said, "Thank you for showing us that resistance is possible." One letter came from a father in Tanzania. He wrote, "I have 3 daughters. I send them to school every day, and I worry about what they're being taught. I worry that they're being told their father's beliefs are wrong, that their grandfather's wisdom is ignorance, that their culture is oppression, that their religion is hate. Your speech gave me hope that not all leaders have surrendered, that someone is still fighting for our children." Another letter came from a university student in Senegal. She wrote, "I'm studying in France. Every day my professors tell me that Africa needs to evolve, that we need to abandon our traditional views, that we need to embrace progressive values, They make me feel ashamed of where I come from. They make me feel like my parents are ignorant. They make me feel like I have to choose between education and identity. But when I go home, I see my grandmother. I see my community. I see people who are happy, who are whole, who don't need Western validation to know who they are. Your speech reminded me that I don't have to choose, that I can be educated and African, that I can be modern and moral, that I can be progressive without being Western. A teacher from Uganda wrote, "I've been teaching for 30 years. I've watched as our curriculum changed, as foreign organizations came in with new textbooks, as our children were taught to question everything their parents taught them, as confusion replaced clarity. Your speech gave me courage to speak up in staff meetings, to question these changes, to advocate for our values." A pastor from Congo wrote, "The church has been under pressure to change our teachings, to accept what the Bible clearly condemns, to call sin by another name, to prioritize inclusion over truth. Many pastors have compromised, many have gone silent. Your speech reminded me that leadership means standing for truth even when truth is unpopular." A young entrepreneur from Rwanda wrote, "I run a tech startup. I'm educated. I'm progressive in many ways. But I'm also deeply rooted in my culture. And I'm tired of being told that to be modern, I must abandon tradition. That to be successful, I must adopt Western values entirely. Your speech showed me that there's another path, that Africa can innovate while remaining African, that we can build the future without erasing our past." A grandmother from Zambia sent a handwritten letter. She wrote, "I am 83 years old. I have lived through colonization. I have seen independence. I have watched as the world changed. And I have never been more worried about my grandchildren than I am now. Not because of poverty, not because of disease, but because they are being taught to be ashamed of who they are. Your words gave me hope that not everyone has forgotten what matters. These are the voices the media didn't amplify. These are the stories they didn't tell, because it doesn't fit their narrative. Because it proves that millions of Africans reject what they're trying to impose on us. Because it shows that the resistance is not just one president, but an entire continent of people who are tired of being controlled." Then came the consequences. Real consequences. Economic consequences. Political consequences. Diplomatic consequences. Funding withdrawn. The European Union officially suspended 400 million euros in aid. The United States reduced our assistance package by 60%. Canada canceled 3 development projects. Germany froze cooperation agreements. France recalled their ambassador for consultations. Projects frozen. The World Bank put all our pending loans on hold. The African Development Bank delayed approval of infrastructure funding. International NGOs suspended operations in our country. Foreign investors canceled planned projects. Invitations canceled. I was uninvited from the G20 summit. Burkina Faso was removed from the list of speakers at the UN General Assembly. Regional conferences suddenly had no space for our delegation. International forums that had invited me months earlier sent polite letters explaining that circumstances had changed. Diplomatic whispers turned into threats. Ambassadors called my foreign minister to express concerns. Trade agreements were suddenly under review. Visa processing for our citizens slowed to a crawl. Our diplomats were treated coldly at international gatherings. They said, "Burkina Faso will suffer." And maybe we will. But at least it will be our suffering, not theirs. At least we'll suffer with our dignity intact. At least we'll struggle while standing, not prosper while kneeling. Because dignity has a price. Freedom has a cost. And real leadership is not about comfort. It's about conviction. It's not about ease. It's about integrity. It's not about popularity. It's about principle. Our economy may slow down, but our pride will not. Our resources may be limited, but our resolve is infinite. Our challenges may increase, but our commitment will not waver. I told my ministers, we may lose their aid, but we will build our own. We may lose their approval, but we will gain our people's respect. We may lose their investment, but we will develop our own capacity. We may lose their support, but we will discover our own strength. And that's worth more than gold. That's worth more than all their conditional aid. That's worth more than their empty promises and their strings-attached assistance. They threatened sanctions. I said, sanction me if you must. But remember, every sanction births a stronger Africa. Every restriction forces us to innovate. Every barrier pushes us to cooperate with each other instead of depending on you. We will eat what we grow, we will wear what we weave, we will use what we make, and we will stand on the soil of our own making. Let me tell you what sanctions mean. They mean we can't access international loans as easily, we can't trade freely with Western nations, we can't participate in certain global programs, we can't get the same preferential treatment we once had. But you know what sanctions also mean? They mean we have to become self-sufficient. They mean we have to develop our own industries. They mean we have to trade with each other instead of depending on them. They mean we have to build supply chains that don't run through their ports. They mean we have to create value chains that don't enrich their corporations. Sanctions are meant to punish us, but they might just liberate us. They might just force us to do what we should have done decades ago. They might just push us toward the independence we claimed in the 1,960 seconds but never actually achieved. Because the truth is, we've been dependent for too long. We've been consumers instead of producers. We've been borrowers instead of builders. We've been importers instead of manufacturers. And that dependency is exactly what keeps us controlled. They loan us money to buy their products. Then we owe them debt. Then they use that debt to make demands. Then we comply to keep the money flowing. And the cycle continues. We stay poor, they stay rich. We stay dependent, they stay in control. But what if we break the cycle? What if we stop borrowing? What if we stop buying? What if we start building? What if we start producing? What if we start trading with each other? That's what terrifies them. Not that we'll suffer under sanctions, but that we'll thrive without them. That we'll discover we never needed them as much as they made us believe. That we'll realize the poverty they claim to be helping us escape is actually caused by the system they created to help us. I told my agriculture minister, we're going to achieve food self-sufficiency in 5 years. No more importing rice from Asia. No more importing wheat from America. No more importing corn from Europe. We grow it here or we don't eat it. He said, that's ambitious, Mr. President. I said, ambition is all we have left. They've taken our dignity. They've taken our resources. They've taken our autonomy, but they can't take our ambition. They can't take our determination. They can't take our will to be free. I told my trade minister, we're going to prioritize trade with other African nations. We're going to build supply chains that don't depend on Europe or America. We're going to create markets within Africa for African products made by African workers using African resources. He said, they'll call it isolationism. I said, let them call it whatever they want. We'll call it Pan-Africanism. We'll call it South-South cooperation. We'll call it independence. We'll call it the future. I told my education minister, we're going to review every curriculum, every textbook, every program, and we're going to remove anything that teaches our children to be ashamed of who they are. Anything that makes them feel inferior. Anything that suggests their culture is primitive or their values are outdated. She said, the international community won't like that. I said, the international community doesn't raise our children, we do. The international community doesn't live with the consequences of confused, ashamed, identityless young people. We do. The international community doesn't have to watch as our children reject their parents, their culture, their faith. We do. You see, this is bigger than one speech. This is bigger than one policy disagreement. This is bigger than whether we accept or reject one particular Western ideology. This is about the fundamental question of who controls Africa's future, who defines Africa's values, who determines Africa's path. For 60 years, we've been told that development means becoming more like the West, that progress means adopting their values, that success means earning their approval, that modernity means abandoning our traditions, that education means accepting their worldview, that civilization means copying their culture. But what if that's wrong? What if development means becoming more authentically ourselves? What if progress means strengthening what makes us unique? What if success means building societies that reflect our values, not theirs? What if modernity means updating our methods while preserving our principles? What if education means learning from the world while remaining rooted in our identity? What if civilization means creating our own model rather than imitating theirs? That's the question I'm asking. That's the challenge I'm presenting. And that's why they're so threatened. That's why the reaction has been so strong. That's why they're willing to sacrifice billions in aid and trade just to punish one small African country. Because if Burkina Faso succeeds, If we build a prosperous nation without compromising our values, then we prove their entire model is unnecessary. We prove that Africa doesn't need to become Western to succeed. We prove that there are multiple paths to development, and their path is not the only one. We prove that you can be modern and moral, progressive and principled, developed and dignified. That's the real threat. Not that we'll fail, but that we'll succeed. Not that we'll collapse without them, but that we'll thrive without them. Not that we'll suffer in isolation, but that we'll prosper in independence. And if we succeed, others will follow. Mali will follow, Niger will follow, Chad will follow. Eventually, the whole continent will follow, and then their entire system of control collapses. Then Africa becomes truly independent. Then the resources they've been extracting for centuries stay in Africa. Then the wealth they've been siphoning for generations builds African nations. Then the power they've been monopolizing for decades shifts to African hands. That's the nightmare scenario for them. An independent Africa, a self-sufficient Africa, an Africa that says no and means it. An Africa that controls its own resources, defines its own values, determines its own future. So they target me, they isolate Burkina Faso, they make an example of us. They want to show other African leaders what happens when you defy them. They want to demonstrate that resistance has consequences. They want to prove that independence is impossible. But they're wrong, because every attack makes us stronger. Every sanction forces us to innovate. Every threat unites our people. Every headline that condemns me wins me more support at home. They think they're punishing me, but they're actually liberating me. Because now I don't have to pretend. Now I don't have to be diplomatic. Now I don't have to carefully word my statements to avoid offending them. Now I can speak the full truth without worrying about the consequences. The consequences are already here. The aid is already withdrawn. The sanctions are already imposed. The isolation is already happening. So what else can they do? What else can they threaten? What leverage do they have left? None. They've played all their cards, and we're still standing. Let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story gets interesting. This is where we discover what a nation can do when it stops asking for permission and starts building on principle. 3 months after the sanctions began, I received a call. Not from Europe, not from America, from China. They said, "Mr. President, we've been watching. We're interested in partnership. No conditions. No demands about your internal policies. Just business." I was skeptical. Because China has its own agenda. Every power does. But at least they were honest about it. They wanted resources. They wanted trade. They wanted strategic partnership. But they didn't want to rewrite our constitution. They didn't want to lecture us about our values. They didn't want to remake us in their image. 2 weeks later, representatives arrived from Russia. Same message. We respect sovereignty. We don't interfere in internal affairs. Let's discuss trade and cooperation. Then came the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. They said, "We share values. We understand faith. We know what it means to preserve tradition while pursuing development. Let's build together." Then Turkey, then India, then Indonesia, then Malaysia. Suddenly, we weren't isolated. We were connected to a different network, a network of nations tired of Western domination. A network of countries seeking alternatives to the old colonial relationships. A network of peoples who understand that development doesn't require surrendering identity. Within 6 months, we had negotiated new trade agreements worth more than what Europe had withdrawn. We had secured infrastructure funding from alternative sources. We had partnerships that came with no conditions about our values or our laws. But more importantly, we had discovered something revolutionary. We didn't need them as much as they made us believe. We didn't need their approval. We didn't need their validation. We didn't need their model. I launched what I called the Burkina Faso Renaissance Initiative. 5 pillars: agriculture, manufacturing, technology, education, culture. Agriculture first. We invested heavily in local farming. We provided seeds, tools, training to farmers. We built irrigation systems. We created cooperatives. We established government-guaranteed prices for key crops. Within 2 years, rice imports dropped by 70%. Wheat imports fell by half. We weren't just feeding ourselves. We were exporting to neighboring countries. Manufacturing next. We stopped exporting raw materials and importing finished products. We built processing plants. Cotton grown in Burkina Faso was now woven in Burkina Faso. Minerals mined in Burkina Faso were now processed in Burkina Faso. Jobs were created. Skills were developed. Wealth stayed home. Technology third. We invested in digital infrastructure. We trained software developers. We created tech hubs. Young Burkina Faso started building apps, platforms, solutions for African problems. Not copying Silicon Valley. Creating African innovation for African needs. Education fourth. We reformed the entire system. We kept what was good from Western education. Math, science, critical thinking. But we added what was missing. History. Real history. Not colonial history that makes us look primitive, but African history that shows our civilizations, our achievements, our contributions. We taught our languages alongside French. We taught our values alongside universal principles. We created pride alongside knowledge. Culture fifth. We invested in arts, music, film, literature. We told our own stories. We created our own media. We stopped consuming only Western culture and started producing African culture. Our musicians sang in our languages. Our filmmakers told our stories. Our writers documented our experiences. And the world started paying attention, not because we copied them, but because we offered something different. Something authentic. Something real. The transformation wasn't easy. It wasn't smooth. There were challenges, setbacks, failures. But there was also something we hadn't felt in decades. Hope, pride, purpose. People started returning home. The brain drain reversed. Young Burkina Faso who had fled to Europe started coming back. Engineers, doctors, teachers, entrepreneurs. They said, "We want to build something real. We want to be part of something meaningful. We want to contribute to something that matters." Investors started noticing. Not the conditional aid donors, but real investors. People who saw opportunity. People who recognized potential. People who understood that a nation with pride is a nation with productivity. Within 3 years, our GDP grew by 12%. Unemployment dropped by 8 percentage points. Poverty decreased by 15%. Literacy rates increased. Health outcomes improved. Infrastructure expanded. And we did it without compromising, without surrendering, without kneeling. But the most important change wasn't economic. It was psychological. People walked taller. They spoke prouder. They believed stronger. They stopped apologizing for being African. They stopped seeking Western validation. They stopped measuring success by foreign standards. A young man told me, "Mr. President, 5 years ago, my dream was to leave Burkina Faso, to go to France, to escape Africa. But now, my dream is to stay here, to succeed here, because now I believe it's possible, because now I see a future that includes me, that values me, that respects who I am." That's what sovereignty does. That's what dignity creates. That's what happens when you stop begging and start building. To the world, stop confusing control with compassion. Stop weaponizing human rights to rewrite our humanity. Stop using aid as a tool of manipulation. Stop pretending your values are universal when they're actually just Western. Stop demanding that we change while you remain unchanged. Stop insisting that we modernize while you return to paganism. Stop telling us to progress while you regress into moral chaos. We do not hate anyone. We do not wish harm on anyone. We do not seek conflict with anyone, but we will not rewrite nature to please the West. We will not turn our children into social experiments to qualify for your aid. We will not exchange tradition for trending hashtags to earn your approval. We will not compromise our faith to join your international community. To every African leader, listen carefully. They will come for you next, first with money. They'll offer aid, loans, investment, development assistance. And it will come with conditions, small conditions at first, reasonable sounding conditions, but conditions nonetheless. Then with policies, they'll ask you to sign agreements, to adopt frameworks, to implement programs, to change laws. And each change will move you further from your values and closer to their control. Then, with threats. When you hesitate, when you resist, when you question, they'll threaten to withdraw support. They'll threaten economic consequences. They'll threaten isolation. They'll threaten your political survival. And finally, if you still don't comply, they'll move to replace you. They'll fund opposition groups. They'll support protests. They'll call it pro-democracy movements. They'll call it the will of the people. They'll call it the Arab Spring or the Color Revolution or whatever name is fashionable, but it's regime change. It's the same old colonialism with a new marketing campaign. Do not bow. Stand tall. You were chosen by your people, not appointed by foreigners. You answer to your citizens, not to international organizations. You serve your nation, not the global community. And when they threaten you, remember this. Their threats prove you're on the right path. They only threaten leaders who threaten their system. They only attack presidents who won't be puppets. They only isolate nations that insist on being independent. If they're comfortable with you, you're probably compromised. If they're praising you, you're probably compliant. If they're giving you awards and international recognition, you're probably serving their interests, not your people's. But if they're attacking you, if they're sanctioning you, if they're calling you dangerous, then you're probably doing something right. Then you're probably actually leading. Then you're probably actually serving your people. I've learned this through experience. I've watched how they operate. I've seen their playbook. Let me share it with you so you're not caught unprepared. Stage 1, the seduction. They come with smiles and promises. They offer partnership. They talk about shared values and mutual interests. They make you feel important, included, part of the global community. This is when they're studying you, learning your weaknesses, identifying your price, testing your resolve. Stage 2, the hook. They give you something, a small loan, a minor grant, some technical assistance, nothing too big, nothing that seems dangerous, but enough to make you dependent, enough to make you comfortable, enough to make you think the relationship is beneficial. This is when they're building leverage. Stage 3, the demand. Now they start asking for things. Small things at first. Sign this document, adopt this policy, attend this conference, support this resolution. Each request seems reasonable in isolation, but together they're building a web of compliance. This is when they're testing your boundaries. Stage 4, the pressure. If you resist, the pressure increases. The requests become demands. The suggestions become requirements. The friendly advisor becomes a stern instructor. They remind you of all they've done for you. They point out all you'll lose if you don't cooperate. This is when they're revealing their true nature. Stage 5, the punishment. If you still resist, the punishment begins. Aid withdrawn, loans denied, projects canceled, reputation attacked, isolation imposed. They make an example of you to warn others. This is when they're trying to break you. Stage 6, the replacement. If you won't break, they'll try to remove you. Opposition funded, protests organized, media campaigns launched, international pressure applied. Regime change pursued. This is when they're showing their desperation. I've been through all 6 stages. I know every tactic, every trick, every weapon in their arsenal, and I'm still standing. Because I prepared. Because I built alternatives. Because I never let them become my only option. Here's my advice to you, my fellow African leaders. First, diversify your partnerships. Don't depend on one region, one bloc, one ideology. Build relationships across the world. China, Russia, Turkey, India, the Gulf, Latin America, Asia. The more options you have, the less leverage they have. Second, invest in self-sufficiency, food security, energy independence, manufacturing capacity, technology infrastructure. The more you can produce yourself, the less you need to import. The less you import, the less they can threaten you with sanctions. Third, strengthen regional integration. Trade with your neighbors. Build African supply chains. Create continental markets. The stronger Africa's internal economy, the less we need external approval. When we trade with each other, their sanctions hurt them more than us. Fourth, control your narrative. Don't let them define you. Don't let their media tell your story. Build your own platforms. Train your own journalists. Create your own content. Tell your own truth. The person who controls the story controls the perception. Fifth, unite your people. Make sure your citizens understand what's at stake. Make sure they know why you're resisting. Make sure they're willing to sacrifice for sovereignty. A leader can't stand alone against international pressure, but a leader with a united population is unstoppable. Sixth, prepare for consequences. Don't be naive. Resistance has costs. Economic pressure, political isolation, media attacks, assassination attempts, coup plots, they will come for you, so prepare. Build alternative systems, secure your security. Protect your economy, strengthen your institutions. Seventh, never compromise on core values. You can negotiate on tactics, you can be flexible on methods, but never surrender your principles, never trade your values for their money. Because once you compromise the core, you've lost everything. You might gain temporary comfort, but you've lost permanent legitimacy. Eighth, document everything. Keep records, save emails, record conversations. Document their demands. Because when they attack you, when they call you authoritarian or anti-democratic or dangerous, you'll need evidence. You'll need proof of what they asked you to do. You'll need documentation of their attempts to control you. Ninth, build alliances with other resistant leaders. You're not alone. There are others who think like you, others who resist like you, others who understand like you. Find them. Connect with them. Support each other. Learn from each other. Stand together. 10th, never give up. They're counting on you to break. They're expecting you to surrender. They're waiting for you to compromise. Don't. Stand firm. Stay strong. Keep fighting. Because the moment you give up, you prove them right. But every day you stand proves them wrong. And to the people of Africa, this is your moment. This is your time. This is your opportunity to reclaim what was stolen. Not just land, not just resources, but identity, dignity, self-determination. Stand for what your ancestors died protecting. They didn't fight colonialism so we could surrender to neocolonialism. They didn't sacrifice for independence so we could choose dependence. They didn't struggle for freedom so we could trade it for aid. Stand for family, the family structure that has sustained humanity since the beginning, the family that raises children with identity and purpose, the family that transfers values from generation to generation, the family that creates stable societies and strong nations. Stand for faith. Whatever your faith is, stand for it. Don't let them tell you that faith is primitive. Don't let them tell you that religion is oppression. Don't let them tell you that you must choose between faith and modernity. You can be both faithful and forward-thinking. You can be both religious and rational. You can be both spiritual and successful. Stand for Africa, not the Africa they want us to be, but the Africa we are. Not the Africa that apologizes for its existence, but the Africa that celebrates its uniqueness. Not the Africa that begs for acceptance, but the Africa that demands respect. Because if we lose those things, if we lose family and faith and African identity, then what are we defending? What are we building? What are we becoming? We'll be rich, maybe. We'll be developed, possibly. We'll be modern, certainly. But we won't be us. We won't be African. We won't be the people our ancestors were. We won't be the people our children need us to be. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with my son. He's 15. Smart kid, curious, always asking questions. He asked me, "Papa, why are you fighting them? Why don't you just take their money and make everyone happy?" I said, "Because, son, their money comes with chains, and I'd rather you inherit poverty with freedom than wealth with slavery." He said, "But Papa, poverty is hard. People are suffering. Don't you care about that?" I said, "I care deeply. That's why I'm fighting. Because the poverty they offer to relieve is the poverty they created. They extract our resources, exploit our labor, manipulate our markets, and then offer us loans to survive the poverty their system created. That's not charity. That's control." He said, "But what if we fail? What if the economy collapses? What if people turn against you?" I said, "Then I fail as a leader who tried to free his people, not succeed as a leader who kept them enslaved. I'd rather be remembered as the president who risked everything for sovereignty than the president who sold everything for comfort." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Papa, I'm proud of you. My friends' fathers all talk about wanting to leave Africa, but you're fighting to build Africa. That makes me want to stay. That makes me want to help." That conversation reminded me why this fight matters. It's not about me. It's not about this presidency. It's not about this generation alone. It's about what we pass to the next generation. Do we pass them a continent that knows how to stand, or a continent that only knows how to kneel? Do we pass them nations with sovereignty, or territories with submission? Do we pass them an identity they're proud of, or a confusion they're ashamed of? That's what this is about. That's what's at stake. That's why I won't compromise. They can keep their aid. We will keep our soul. They can keep their approval. We will keep our dignity. They can keep their international community. We will keep our national identity. And when our grandchildren ask us what we did during this moment, during this crucial time when Africa's future hung in the balance, we'll be able to say we stood. When it cost us everything, we stood. When the whole world pressured us to surrender, we stood. When they threatened us, isolated us, attacked us, we stood. Because that's what it means to be Burkinabe. That's what it means to be African. That's what it means to be free. Let me share something else with you. Something they don't want you to know. Something they've hidden for decades. Africa is not poor. Africa has never been poor. Africa is the richest continent on earth. We have the resources. We have the people. We have the potential. What we've lacked is not wealth, but control of our wealth. 60% of the world's arable land is in Africa. We can feed the world, yet we import food. 30% of the world's mineral reserves are in Africa. We have gold, diamonds, cobalt, lithium, rare earth elements, everything the modern world needs. Yet we export raw materials and import finished products. 60% of the world's solar energy potential is in Africa. We have endless sunshine, yet we suffer power shortages. 50% of the world's remaining biodiversity is in Africa. We have nature's pharmacy, yet we import medicine. We're not poor. We're exploited. We're not underdeveloped. We're overexploited. We're not lacking resources. We're lacking control of resources. And that's what they're afraid of. That's what they're fighting to prevent. That's why they pressure us to maintain the system. Because if Africa wakes up, if Africa takes control, if Africa starts using its resources for African development, then the whole global economic system changes. Then the balance of power shifts. Then their prosperity, built on our exploitation, comes to an end. They need us poor. They need us dependent. They need us compliant, because their wealth requires our poverty. Their development requires our underdevelopment. Their progress requires our regression. That's the truth they don't teach in schools. That's the reality they don't show in media. That's the system they don't want questioned. But I'm questioning it. Burkina Faso is challenging it, and increasingly, Africa is rejecting it. We're not asking for charity. We're demanding justice. We're not seeking aid. We're seeking equity. We're not begging for development. We're building it ourselves. And it's working, despite the sanctions, despite the pressure, despite the attacks. It's working. Our agricultural output increased by 28% in 3 years. Our manufacturing sector grew by 35%. Our technology exports increased by 42%. Our GDP growth consistently outpaced regional averages. Our poverty rate declined faster than neighboring countries. We did this without their aid, without their approval, without their conditions. We did this by believing in ourselves, by trusting our people, by controlling our resources, by defining our own path. And if Burkina Faso can do it, any African nation can do it. If we can resist, anyone can resist. If we can build, anyone can build. That's the message I want to leave with you. The message of possibility, the message of hope, the message of liberation. You don't need their permission to be great. You don't need their approval to succeed. You don't need their aid to develop. You need vision. You need courage. You need unity. You need determination. You need faith in your people, your resources, your potential. The rest will follow. The development will come. The prosperity will arrive. The recognition will happen. But it will be on your terms, reflecting your values, serving your people, building your future. We are not afraid. We are free. History will remember those who said no when saying yes would have been easy. History will remember those who stood when sitting would have been comfortable. History will remember those who resisted when compliance would have been profitable. This is not rebellion. This is resurrection. This is Africa waking up. This is Africa remembering. This is Africa reclaiming. This is Africa rising. And no amount of sanctions, no amount of pressure, No amount of threats will stop it, because an idea whose time has come cannot be stopped. A people who have decided to be free cannot be enslaved. A continent that has chosen dignity over dependency cannot be controlled. They thought they could buy us. They were wrong. They thought they could threaten us. They were wrong. They thought they could break us. They were wrong. We are Burkina Faso. We are Africa, and we will be free. This is our declaration. This is our commitment. This is our destiny. We will build our own schools, and they will teach our values. We will grow our own food, and it will nourish our bodies. We will create our own industries, and they will employ our people. We will write our own stories, and they will inspire our children. We will define our own success, and it will reflect our priorities. We will not apologize for who we are. We will not compromise what we believe. We will not surrender what our ancestors died protecting. We are the generation that said enough. We are the leaders who chose principle over profit. We are the people who reclaimed our destiny. And 50 years from now, when African children study history, they will learn about this moment. They will learn about the presidents who stood. They will learn about the nations that resisted. They will learn about the continent that finally broke free. And they will thank us, not for making their lives easy, but for making their lives possible, not for giving them comfort, but for giving them dignity, not for leaving them wealth, but for leaving them freedom. That's the legacy I want to leave. That's the Burkina Faso I want to build. An Africa that stands tall, an Africa that thinks independently, an Africa that builds authentically, an Africa that leads globally, not by copying others, but by being ourselves, not by seeking approval, but by commanding respect, not by following their path, but by creating our own. This is our time, this is our moment, this is our future. We are not afraid, we are free, and we will never surrender that freedom again.